Hi, you're watching Vantage Point, a special recording session on the sideline of the International Conference on the Global Movement of Moderates. And I have a very interesting person because I've always admired the Scandinavian countries, Denmark included. And it will be interesting to see the views from there about being moderate, about moderations, because if we look at the quality of life index, the peace index, a lot of indexes of the world, Denmark, Norway, Sweden will be right there on top. But what happened recently in Norway really shocked a lot of people. We didn't expect that. The last time we had that kind of shock was when a very top political figure was stabbed in a shopping complex in Stockholm. So if I were to bring in the perspective from North Europe on this, and because it's very similar to Southeast Asia in the sense that you can understand the need to have a rather slower pace of development as in contrast to huge development, people running around. In Southeast Asia, we appreciate that too. The bit piece of quiet. KL is bustling, but you go out in the rural areas, you know, it's really transparent like that. But when something suddenly exploded like that, so when we discuss moderation, I guess we really have to really look all around us, because we just don't know where it's coming from. It will be the last place, for example, for us to look at and find a terrorist, and that will be looking at Norway or Iceland or even Denmark and Sweden. But now, after that episode, people have to rethink how they look at things and also the values of before. Professor, your views on that?
I think it's true that when we are looking at negative things like extremism and terrorism, it is psychologically very important for us to think that this is something that is somewhere outside. It is not among us. It has to be somewhere far away. And this is why it was very difficult for us from us in the northern part of Europe to really realize that, hey, this terrorism is among us. And it was even, in fact, so that the latest event in Norway, the first reports of the bombs in Oslo, when they came, people didn't know who is behind.
Okay.
And the assumption was that it was something from outside.
Yes.
And then we talked about terrorism. Once we realized that it was a Norwegian, then we said, I think mass murder, and it was no longer terrorism. Only a few days later we realized, yes, it is terrorism, and that therefore terrorism is among us. It would have been so much nicer for us to think terrorism is something that is far away from us.
If you get past the everyday layman's reaction to it, because you have always looked at conflicts and international relations, political science, a scholarly way of trying to find answers, understanding, and hopefully that will bring to resolutions. But if you look at that, when you don't even see it coming, when you don't even think that there's problems around us, suddenly it exploded. So how do we talk about moderation in that kind of setting? Because it's always what we've heard here at this conference, where we're looking at something that the 1% of the population is doing, but even 0.1% is enough to really disturb 100%, for example. So in that case, and in early reactions to it, from a scholarly academic point of view, how do you think it was approached?
I think we have to remember that even though, I mean, terrorism differs from conflict violence from that point of view, that terrorism doesn't need mobilization. It really needs to be just a bunch of people.
Yeah.
At the same time, the more we have studied the profiles of terrorist individuals, the more we have realized that one part of terrorism to appear or one kind of condition is that there has to be a subculture that accepts it.
Okay.
Terrorists tend to be people who want to be heroes. In a culture where you don't have any tolerance towards violence against civilians, you don't have anybody who would think he would become a hero by killing people. Unfortunately, I think that that in Nordic countries we have had political movements that are very anti-immigrant.
Okay.
And also I would say, even though this is not admitted openly, I would say we do have movements that are anti-Muslim, small groups. The existence of those subcultures is a necessary condition for this kind of terrorism. So in that sense, even though it surprised us that suddenly we had an incident of terrorism in Norway, it was still something that didn't catch us experts by surprise. I think the existence of a subculture which was so very strongly anti-foreigner was a condition that should have warned us of the possibility.
If it had happened in Holland, even in UK, there's even far-right political movement. You know, Geert Wilder, an elected MP in the Dutch Parliament, and even in Euro Parliament, people espousing messages that promote hate, for example, or very fierce critics of Islam or anything else. You can see that coming. But for Nordic or Scandinavian countries, especially with society that looks at welfare very, very closely, you know, a lot of things are free in Sweden, in Denmark, education, stuff, health. Of course, you have higher taxes, but there's always the balance. But when the importance of welfare is up there, and yet there's now the rising sentiment against people from the outside. So how would society now recalibrate that? Because there might be people who tend to say that that's why we must have a more close policy now. We don't want that to ever happen again. So how would argument of moderation work in that particular case?
That's a good question. I think, first of all, I think the fact that Scandinavia has welfare policies is partly linked to the calls for closed societies. I mean, or not closed societies, but closed borders. Because of the fact that people feel that if our generations have built a welfare state, we want to enjoy it ourselves. But at the same time, I think this kind of populistic anti-foreigner movements tend to have their life cycle. I think there are clear signals that, for example, in Denmark, anti-foreigner movements are on the decline. I think in most other northern European countries, in Finland also, it's still relatively strong, but it's on the decline. And I think the final death knell to many of them is when they get a power position. Because responsibility and populism don't go together.
They don't go together.
I mean, once they are in government, for example, then people realize that they simply cannot kind of sustain their populist policies.
We have to go for the first commercial break, but once we are back, I would like to link what we have discussed to being inclusive. There's this argument because there are worries and fears about Europe as a whole. Because if we look at the rise, numbers, and intensity of the far-right political movements, the BNP, the Geert Wilder Party in Holland, and a few other countries, and Sweden now talking about extreme far-right entities, maybe it's better to let them be organized. form themselves into an institution like a political party, so that their views, their fears, their worries can be moderated against the majority, for example. Hence, you don't need to pen it up and one day do things that will be considered as a terrorist act. But will that be a focus of having moderation in politics? If we look at Europe as an example, for example, because in these parts of the world, keep looking at Europe because it's former colonial ties on the political system, social system and such, even legal system. So would being more moderate in politics, meaning we have to be open to include even what was not acceptable before, like the far-right political movement, as an everyday thing that we must consider in our life? That we'll discuss after this short break. You're still watching Vantage Point, and I'm still here on the sideline of the International Conference on Global Movement of Moderates, and I'm still with Professor Timo A. Kivimaki from University of Copenhagen. If we look at it, would there be fair to say we should be giving a chance for people who fear a lot of things to form themselves into groups, accepted groups, and be accepted into the system? Far-right entities, even in politics, are still being debated about. A lot of people say we shouldn't acknowledge because it's an extreme point of our political views. But if we include them in the system, the others will argue that that's better than not engaging them at all. So where would moderation be in the debate about far-right political movement in Europe?
I think you're absolutely right when you're saying that normally if you allow a political channel for a political view, it's much better than forcing that political view into expressing itself by means of demonstrative moves like violence. I think all in all, it is the question of violence that should be the dividing line. I mean, of course, that's also the reality in Europe that you cannot really you cannot contain a movement unless it is a violent movement. If there is a political agenda, of course, it has to have a political channel. I think all in all, this relates to what your Prime Minister said yesterday. Your Prime Minister said that moderation cannot mean censoring the voices of different people who some people would consider as not moderate. Moderation means only that there has to be a louder voice of reason. And I fully agree with that. It's very important to and also I think these extreme movements, hostile movements that are hostile to foreigners, for example, I think these movements are fundamentally incompatible with the realities of today. Europe would not live a day without foreigners. We need international influence. So in that sense, they will collapse in their own impossibility in any case. So in that sense, one wouldn't need to worry about them in the long term.
That's why I'm very interested to ask you on because on the economic equation of being a moderate, because even in the Prime Minister's speech, he was saying even though there was not a single bullet fired, but we must talk about moderation in the economic sense. Wall Street having that much power to have devastating impact on the life of real economy, people in the real economy, even as far as South America and Asia and Africa, because of what a trader in a financial market on Wall Street would have done. So if we were to talk about the economic imperatives, a new global financial architecture, how to moderate greed and power in the economic sense, I guess it's ironic because when we look at EU, competitiveness economically is one of the main reasons why EU got together. But that's also the argument of a lot of people who are calling for their countries to be a bit more closed as opposed to open door policies, because they worry and they fear about their own quality of life. It's tougher for them to compete for the economic cake. It's tougher for them to fight to go into their own universities because of the foreign students, for example. I guess we can really understand why is it that they have to go there. So, but in Asia, we're thinking that if we achieve a higher level of quality of life, if the middle class grow bigger and people go up the value chain in terms of the economic strata, then we have less of that. But when we look at Europe now, so many developed nations and the formation of EU, but this problem didn't go away, of people fearing for their own security economically or otherwise. And then we look at the biggest superpower in the world now, the only monopolizing superpower that is the United States of America. And they have the Tea Party movement, which is sort of an extreme spin-off from the Republican, for example. So, achieving developed nation status and better quality of life doesn't guarantee that you won't have extreme movement spark out of fear from the economic side. So what are your views on that?
I mean, I start from this idea that I mean, I think the best thing, I think, in this new initiative of Malaysia regarding to movement of moderates is that it's not a concept that has been defined here in Malaysia.
Okay.
It's actually not defined at all. It is a living concept, and what is happening now is the Prime Minister, your Prime Minister, is kind of inviting others to jointly define the concept, and this gives others
A chance.
part of the ownership of the concept, and the movement. So I think that's a good thing. What feels as extreme and what feels as moderate in the economy differs obviously from place to place. I think what is important is that ideas about economy, ideas about fairness in the economy are now debated more inclusively. And it's partly because of the fact that East Asia has become so much more important economically, globally. When I think of this question of the fear for kind of international influence, I think this stems from one of the relatively nice things about capitalism, and that is that capitalism has a place for everybody. Now, Europe is mostly fearful of international influence because our salaries are high. That means that whoever produces something where salaries are a big component of the product will be able to produce it cheaper. So in that sense, even though Europe has traditionally done relatively well in terms of competitiveness, it still has to be fearful of international influence because of the fact that...
Okay, we'll go for the last commercial break, but once we are back, I would like to take a leave out of Professor Kishore Mahbubani's presentation. He talked all and take quite an Asian perspective, because he was making this point that, and he said this out loud, that it's time for Asians to respect Asians. And of course he was talking about education and how the Western education has managed to really prosper, educate, and make savvy the elites of the rest of the world, but not their own elite of society. So I would like to reverse that to you after this short break on what can ASEA offer. I mean, you've been in Institute of Asian Studies, and obviously you have looked academically and scholarly at what's happening in Asia. What would scholars or even anyone else from Europe or the Western world look at Asia in terms of looking at this moderation movement of moderates? What do we have to offer? Maybe when it's in front of our eyes, we take it for granted. But looking from there, looking from up north, from Europe, or looking from America, you can see things that you can appreciate, that you think would be essential for this global movement to work. That after this short break. I have only a few minutes left, so I'm going to go straight to Professor Timo Kivimaki. And what do you think Asia has to offer in terms of things to pick up and champion for the global movement of moderates?
I think Asian moderation has achieved results. I mean, everybody talks about Asian economic results. I would like to talk about Asian results in terms of conflict prevention.
Okay.
I mean, Asia has since, East Asia especially, has since 1979 been exceptionally peaceful.
Okay.
I mean, of course, democratization has created more noise about the remaining conflicts. But I think Asia has managed to find a different formula for conflict prevention. And that formula, I think, is something that others should study really carefully.
When we look at hotspots, we used to call them that. We still have some concern in the south of Thailand. We look at Mindanao. Yes, talks are ongoing. Malaysia also playing a role, mediating. But it's not that easy to solve that either. We look at Indonesia, well and good, a lot of political reform, democracy is flourishing. But there are still key areas of hotspots too. Aceh is there, but now the impetus is for Acehnese themselves to come to terms. And we look at Papua, there's still issues there. And Sulawesi has its own problems that we know can flare up and it can become very serious. So in that sense, would that be the task for us in Southeast Asia especially, to come together as a grouping, maybe not like EU, but in our own special way, because maybe domestically that issue cannot be solved. That's why Malaysia is assisting Philippines in solving the Mindanao problem, because our majority Malay Muslim composition make us maybe more palatable to the Mindanao citizens to trust in mediation.
I think there are two main challenges, and they are related to something good. I mean, East Asian, Southeast Asian, and East Asian way of preventing conflict has had two components that are fundamentally different from the rest of the world. One is that East Asia has respected sovereignty, and military non-interference has been very important part of the fact that East Asia has been so peaceful.
Okay.
But this should not mean that countries should not help each other in peace processes. If the government is party to a conflict, it cannot be the referee in a conflict.
Yes.
Therefore, somebody else has to be the referee. That's why Malaysia is needed. That's why Indonesia is needed for certain. The other thing is that East Asia has focused on development and things that unite.
Okay.
That has made it difficult for East Asia to resolve conflicts and disputes, because disputes don't unite. Disputes divide.
Yes.
That's one thing that is the other challenge. East Asia, Southeast Asia has to find ways to tackle disputes without making them disproportionate.
So would the real practical challenge to that be how we solve the disputes over South China Sea, for example, because it's involved one of the growing power. It involved a lot of other smaller states around, and a lot of economic interests also. But at the same time, we do know the emphasis of President Barack Obama's administration is also to come back, sort of, into this area, into East Asia, more presence in the Asia Pacific. They have already sealed that with Australia to have the base and all.
Yes. Well, I think it's more general. I think the separatist challenges and the ethnic clashes that Southeast Asia has had, they require a resolution, and somehow it is what Southeast Asia has to do. It has to find a moderate way to resolve disputes without kind of expanding, without making them portray disproportionately in the minds of people. South China Sea is just one of the possible places where that kind of new culture of dispute resolution should kind of grow.
But largely you see a very moderate and peaceful future for East Asia?
I think I don't only see a peaceful future for East Asia. I think East and Southeast Asia's future is in East and Southeast Asian hands. Whatever you make of it is what you get.
Okay.
But I see East Asia's present situation as surprisingly peaceful compared to other regions in the world, and also compared to East Asia's past with Vietnam War, Korea War, and all that.
Thank you so much on that note, Professor Timo Kivimaki. Thank you so much for making
Thanks.
time for
Yeah.
Vantage Point. Thanks to you for watching. We'll catch you in another episode of Vantage Point very, very soon. Goodbye.